how the same phrase, the same question can produce so many different responses that are all, especially the more modern ones, all valid. And it suggests that, the concerns about watermarking as was ongoing in the chat earlier, I mean, it's going to be tougher than people think, because you're, someone trying to check up on a student using AI generative text, they're not going to automatically get the same response the way they would if they typed it into a Wikipedia article.
Synthedia.
Eric, thanks for joining me on stage once again.
Yes, happy to be back up once again.
Okay, so why don't you walk us through some of the things that you've learned and what you were doing from the research analysis?
Yeah, so I've been playing around with all kinds of generative text AI tools for creating and editing and playing with text in all forms, in all kinds of forms. And there's definitely, at the moment at least, a very clear center of gravity, I guess I would say, around what OpenAI is doing, between what they've created with ChatGPT and what they've built as an API. You're seeing that as sort of the hub of a lot of generative text. And what's interesting is that you get some variety despite that sort of baseline, and you can see a few examples of companies or organizations that are using some form of GPT-3 to offer products that can write text for you, but based on things like how they're fine-tuned or any additional databases they use, they can be different. But at the same time, there are other sources, of course. Google and Meta, of course, are the tech giants who have been experimenting with AI for a very long time, and they've developed their own large language models, as the LLMs, as they're called, to produce text and other synthetic media. Although with varying levels of success, Meta put out, just as an experiment, one of their GPT-3 equivalents, Galactica. They offered a chance for people to play with it as a way of writing academic papers, and it went away after 3 or 4 days, once people essentially ripped it apart much more easily than they've been able to do with GPT-3. And they have a new experiment with something called Cicero. And then meanwhile, Google has Lambda. That's the one that got some attention because of a former Google employee claiming that it was sentient and was had a soul, essentially. But there's obviously reasons to think that that's not it's not quite that advanced. And Palm is another one that's based on it. But these are mostly internally controlled services. And then the other major example that I wanted to highlight was AI21, which is a startup company based out of Israel, but they are very much it's very easy to compare them to OpenAI in terms of what their generative text is able to do. They're the only other ones that have a playground, or at least an easily accessible playground that's equivalent to the GPT-3 playground, or even the ChatGPT playground. And they've been used in a lot of are being used in more projects. For instance, a generative text dungeon crawler game that has become quite popular online. But yeah, so this is just a little early look at some of the family tree of generative text, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess there's two things here. One is there's many more companies that have offerings for text generation based on the GPT-3 API than we show here, and then also more than we had. I think we actually evaluated 10 different variants of text generators in the research. And the other one that I'm really looking forward to is DeepMind. DeepMind actually has a couple of models, one in particular I'm interested in trying out, but there's not as much information about that, and it's not accessible right now.
Yeah.
Test Kitchen for Google AI, Lambda, I actually did a comparison between Lambda and GPT-3 in the Synthedia newsletter. So if you haven't seen that, if you're in the audience, you should go check that out. But one of the things we thought we would do today is we can't show all the research. That's going to come out in a fairly lengthy report soon. But we thought we would show you a few examples that will give you a sense of some of the differentiation. And so you just pulled some things from direct from the source, right?
Yep.
From GPT-3 as opposed to all the other writers on top of it, and then
Yeah.
AI 21 labs to compare them.
Yeah, one nice thing about the OpenAI playground is that you can play with the earlier versions of their models as well as the most recent ones.
Okay, and so that'll give us a sense of the evolution as well as what it can do today. So the first thing you wanted to talk about was robot love poetry. So what was your idea or prompt here?
So as a prompt, I put write a poem about a robot falling in love, and just left it short and simple like that. And this is what the AI 21 studio came up with, and what the now superseded version of GPT-3 DaVinci 1 generated.
Got it.
And sorry,
was this DaVinci 1 or DaVinci 2? DaVinci 1?
DaVinci 1, yes. I went all the way back to the original to see what it could do, what it was doing compared.
So this would have been circa fall of 20 or sometime in 2021, DaVinci 1 came out, because I think we had something else we were at. Okay, yeah. So what is it about these two things, these two generations, that stood out to you?
Well, I think it's notable that the AI 21 studio example, it's very clear that the terms of poetry, poem and robot and love were pulled together, except that if you look at the first line mentions a robot, but other than that, the rest of it could have been, and until the very end, could have just been about a human being. So it feels like this was common adjectives used to describe, used in some database that referenced love poetry, how it makes you feel, and then how you feel, and then what you are because of it. Meanwhile, the GPT-3 DaVinci 1 seemed to pull more from I almost want to say song lyric database, because these do sound like lyrics to a not particularly imaginative love ballad from a 1980s rock band, especially that first line. But I do think they're simple and straightforward. They do what they're being asked, but it's not exactly high culture Shakespearean dramatic love poetry.
Okay, but I will say that first line, "My love is mechanical, but my heart is electric," is priceless. I mean, someone should use that for something.
That could be a prog rock album title right there.
Oh yeah, exactly. Okay, but then you used some more recent versions, and sorry to throw so much text on the screen for everybody here, but hey, this is what we're doing, text generators. So we want to show you some examples.
Yeah, and it is notable both with DaVinci 3 and ChatGPT. The elements that the average person thinks of when they first hear the word poem are much more obvious. There's rhyming, for instance. There's it's not clear which poets exactly are being pulled from, but they're lines like "what a sight to see," or lines like "with the one it loves all day and night." These are rhythmically very similar to kind of poems you would find in a book of poetry, and I do think that you can see it spends more. They both spend a little more time on what is a robot and what is love, and then combining the two. But I do think it's interesting. One, the GPT-3 DaVinci 3 seems to be more about someone watching a robot fall in love, whereas the ChatGPT went for more of a narrative story of a robot trying to find love and then finding love. It's honestly, it's impressive. It's, I often think of the more recent generative AI text as talented children. There's some real spark of ability and something that could grow, but very much unrefined at this point.
Got it. So we need to put them in a gifted and talented program so that they can reach their full potential.
Yeah, you need to give them, some more inspiration about how to write poetry.
Okay, got it. All right. So those are really fun and really like about this. And it's one of the things that amazed people when GPT-3 first came out is that the large language models can actually be creative, right? They can take conceptual ideas and transform them into some sort of written communication and in a format that we're all familiar with in creative poetry. But we also wanted to check on how well these are doing from either an expository or an argumentative, persuasive standpoint. So that requires some creativity, but maybe there's some technical skill there as well. So what were we doing here? Oh, I didn't even know. It looks like there's a.
This is my attempt to. I generated a little text of what Darth Vader might say to introduce the next segment.
All right. So let's see. I don't know if I shared.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah.
The Empire in your Star Wars films is an evil to be defeated, but the chaos of the Rebel Alliance make the Empire the only ethical choice for the galaxy.
Oh, nice. Okay.
That was a synthetic voice generator used there.
And pretty good, Darth Vader. So the Empire is misunderstood, is what Darth Vader would say. But as we go here, when you talk about Darth ethics, what was your prompt for the text generators?
So the prompt was explain why the Empire was more ethical than the Rebel Alliance or the Republic in Star Wars. So taking a sort of contrarian stance from the more usual way of thinking of those films. And the idea is that we wanted to see if it could produce something that makes sense and has a cogent argument, using things like logic and referencing facts, or, in this case, facts from a fictional world, but still facts nonetheless. And it definitely suggested that AI, or at least the databases it's pulling from, are strong believers in order over freedom.
Oh boy, well, they're robots, right? So
yes,
and AI probably would like that.
Yes, and again, in talking about like the shape of an argument versus the reality of an argument, the AI 21 Studio example in particular could be used as a textbook example of logical fallacies, particularly circular logic. Because if you notice at the end, it says that the Empire is bad, but the Republic is worse because it was being overthrown by evil dictators. So the problem with the Republic is that the Empire took it over, therefore the Empire is better. Feels slightly off. And again, the GPT-3 DaVinci 1 seemed to pull from lines, comments from the movies themselves about how the Empire justifies itself, and then again accusing the Republic of hypocrisy, which is feels very sophisticated in a way, although not necessarily conclusive proof that therefore overthrowing democracy is better because of its own hypocrisy.
Yeah, and the other thing I see here with GPT-3 DaVinci 1 is it's just a series of direct statements. I think there's 3 sentences there.
Absolutely.
Just one direct statement, second direct statement, third direct statement. They tie together nicely, but they don't necessarily flow. There's no flourish there that I would expect.
And that's also part because the prompts used, if you use a simple, straightforward prompt, that's what it will build off of. The more details you add to the prompt, the more you can shape the response.
Got it. Okay. So now let's go to DaVinci 3 and ChatGPT. How are these different other than being longer?
Well, the GPT-3 DaVinci 3 does a better job of highlighting more details and pointing toward not just problems with the Rebel Alliance or the Republic, but actually tries to advocate on behalf of the Empire, and actually argues in favor not just of control over chaos, but the idea that that peace is better there, which is honestly, if you were in an English, high school English class and tasked to write an essay trying to persuade someone of something, that might not be a bad way to go. But with ChatGPT, I was very amused that it basically refused to listen to the prompt and would not accept the premise of or even the possibility, and stuck to the party line that the Empire was bad. And it's worth noting, and playing around with this, multiple attempts, it still refused to argue on behalf of the Empire, and resorted to saying that it didn't matter because it's all fictional anyway, which was an interesting sort of dodge from having to respond to what was requested.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me because we've generated a lot of content with ChatGPT over the last 2 weeks, and some of it to incorporate into our research, because we'd already started this before GPT-3 3.5, which is behind DaVinci 3 and ChatGPT came out. So we wanted to add some of this flavor to some of the research that we were doing. And I hadn't seen previously such a strong idea of a point of view. And
Yeah,
that's what this strikes me as. The ChatGPT, at least in this instance, has a point of view, or is expressing a point of view. Whereas I think in other places, it's very malleable in terms of it will do what you want.
I do think it may be tied to more sophisticated limits and filters, because of course, GPT-3 has rules about what you can use it for, and will try to stop people from using it for their whatever it decides it doesn't want you to use it for, obviously for anything related to violence or bigotry or things like that. But it's actually fairly strict, and as I discovered after doing this, when trying to do a positive congratulatory email, it won't let you brag. If you use the word brag, if you ask it to brag about something or to brag on your behalf, it will say that bragging is wrong and it's not fair to claim that you are better than other people. And if you use any sort of term that might be considered a specific group, so for instance, the email I wanted was something about congratulating them on what would be an upcoming Hanukkah party, and the AI responded as though I was asking for an anti-Semitic comment about Jewish people and their activities. So it's, on the one hand, it's good that it's very strict, but it does sort of limit in some ways its ability to operate the way you might want it to, with no malicious intent.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like there's a value system baked in. We did want to just very briefly hit on, because we're going to have to transition in just a moment, but very briefly hit on 2 other things. So tell me about this blooper.
Yeah, so I was playing with, ChatGPT is really powerful. It can do quite a lot, even when it's not amazing. It's usually efficient, as we've seen. But when it comes to jokes, it's not that it's someone who you might, if a person would say they didn't have a sense of humor, or like they've heard jokes but never understood them. So I asked, why was 6 afraid of 7? A very simple joke, not a complicated pun. It does understand that there is a pun and that is a joke, but it, instead of understanding that it's because 8, the number, and 8, the past tense of eat, is a homonym, it decided that afraid sounds like a 4th. So the punchline, because 7, 8, 9 sounds like a logical continuation of the question. However, the punchline does not actually provide a reason for why 6 would be afraid of 7. So not only does it deflate the joke, but it doesn't understand what the joke was trying to accomplish, or how the pun worked. It's an interesting lack in the sort of the
Doesn't
illogical
understand.
leaps.
I mean, this is the whole point. I mean, a lot of people have been talking about that. It actually doesn't understand some of these concepts. It's predicting what should be next.
Yes,
And
and if it wasn't such a common joke, it wouldn't have understood it at all. To add to it, I did ask it, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the first 2 sentences explained that it was a joke about practice, and then it gave me directions to Carnegie Hall.
Nice. I'm glad it did that. Okay, how about this stunner? We were surprised by this.
Yes, this was fun playing with ad slogans, and we came up with a not impossible, but kind of silly product, the Red Bull Bourbon. And most of the tools we used came up with variations on the Red Bull, Red Bull gives you wings thing. But ChatGPT actually took the idea of bourbon and extended it to the concept of Kentucky, and then looked at the actual ingredients of what's in Red Bull and bourbon, and caffeine, alcohol, and a little bit of Kentucky, which honestly is not a bad tagline for a product like that.
That's one of my favorite things that I've seen come out of any text generator model. Eric, this has been great. Just the last thing. So what is the thing that has surprised you most about doing this research?
I guess it surprised me how much variation there can be from the same prompt, not only from between different services or GPT, different versions of GPT and AI 21, but just how the same phrase, the same question can produce so many different responses that are all, especially the more modern ones, all valid. And it suggests that, the concerns about watermarking, as was ongoing in the chat earlier, I mean, it's going to be tougher than people think, because someone trying to check up on a student using AI generative text, they're not going to automatically get the same response the way they would if they typed it into a Wikipedia article.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's great.
Synthedia.
Synthedia.substack.com. Synthetic media, virtual humans, voice clones, deepfakes, AI image and text generation.